What up, this is Patrick Hayes, welcome to my YouTube channel. In this video, I want to talk about how to deal with a dominating partner. I want to talk about energy field domination because this is a really powerful topic to get into. And it's something that I think I want to bring language to that a lot of people experience but aren't sure exactly how to describe, and also bring some really powerful techniques for how to navigate through situations where the energy field is being dominated by somebody with really strong domination energy. So if you ever had the experience where you're in a conversation, maybe this is some sort of sales transaction, maybe this is some sort of compromise that you're working on with somebody, and the energy field of the person that you're communicating with is extremely strong, and you agree with what they're saying, and you actually agree with the decisions that are being made, and you guys make an agreement. And then you walk away from that agreement, and as you're on your own, it starts dawning on you that, wait a second, I actually don't really like that agreement. I just agreed to something that doesn't really feel very good to me when I really feel into it. But what happened was, in that moment, I kind of got swept off my feet by the energy of that person. A really good salesman is like this. Swept off my feet by the energy of that person. And I agreed with what was going on because of my empathic resonance ability. But then when I walked away and I kind of started processing it, I realized that's actually not what I like. And that's not what I would like to agree to. So this is a really common thing. And this has to do with the dynamics of energy domination in the field. And I have to say, there's nothing wrong with having a dominating energy. So I'm not criminalizing people that have a really strong energy. This is just the nature of some people. Some people have a very strong emission energy where they don't feel as much, but they're emitting very strongly. And these people can be really excellent guides in many ways. So somebody that has a really strong emitting energy or learns how to develop that capacity has the capacity to bring people into different states and emotions. And so a very powerful speaker that can move people has a strong emitting energy. Somebody that they say like a really good guru or spiritual teacher has a strong emitting energy, and they can emit a field around them that other people can entrain to, and then they can experience higher states of consciousness because they're able to ride and surf on the waves that that person is emitting. So there's nothing wrong with having a powerful energy, and in fact, that's a skill that is important to work on developing, especially if you have different energetic transmissions that you want to share with people. But when somebody is unconsciously emitting powerful energy like this, they can sometimes become unknowingly manipulative and not realize that that's what they're doing. Now, obviously, people can also become consciously manipulative about this. You can see people that use their energy to intimidate or dominate fields, and you can see this as like a sleazy salesman that's really good at selling people, and you get them really hyped up about whatever it is that they're selling, and then takes advantage of them in that weak moment instead of letting them actually feel into it on their own and come to a decision that they feel good about. So one thing to remember about relationships in general is that there's typically one person that's more dominating and active and one person that's more passive in the relationship. And so as a general rule of thumb, it's important to understand which person is more of the dominating presence, right? And then have a conversation regarding that. Like, listen, you have a really dominating presence. And sometimes when I'm in your field, you can be so passionate about what you're saying that I basically become you and I agree with you in that moment. And then I'll agree to things in order, while I'm in resonance with you, that when I separate from you and come into my own space, I don't necessarily agree with anymore. And this is something that I've dealt with in relationships where I've been on either side of this. In some relationships I've been more dominating, and in other relationships I've been more passive. And so I've experienced it from both angles. But it's really important to bring this into the conversation so that the person that is more dominating can practice being more available to hear the truth of what somebody else has to share. And it's also a great opportunity for the person that is more passive to learn how to be more assertive and to be able to set boundaries in a healthy way so that we avoid larger problems that come in the long run when things are not spoken and unhealthy patterns are set into place. So the first thing you can do is open up some dialogue surrounding this theme. And regardless of which side you're on, if you feel like you might be the more dominating one, then you open up the space and say, listen, I realize I can have an overpowering energy sometimes, and I don't mean to sweep you off your feet and kind of take you in my direction. But what I'll do is I'll try to be more conscious, and I'll try to ask you as I'm moving forward to tune in to your own energy and then make a decision from your own truth. But if I am being overpowering, please feel free. I'm creating a safe space for you to kind of put your hands up and say, listen, this is too much. I can't think for myself. I'm kind of being swallowed by you. Let me back up a little bit and come back to you once I've kind of oriented myself and come back to my center, right? And so obviously if you're on the other side of that, you can express that same thing. Listen, it's overwhelming for me when I'm in your presence sometimes, and sometimes I need to, back out a little bit to come into my center before I can actually respond from my own sovereignty. So having this conversation with people, or send them this video, right? Having this conversation with people opens up the space so that now there's a precedent set. And now you understand that there's an energy dynamic going on that if we take care of it early on and we start having this conversation and communicating about it, we can actually end problems before they start. Because see, here's what happens. Oftentimes, the active one in the relationship, if there's any sort of unpredicted circumstance that comes into play, the active one oftentimes will be processing it and responding to it in a way where they're trying to organize the situation to meet their needs. And when they do that, and the other person is in that field, oftentimes that process can result in agreements and decisions that are serving the person with the powerful energy or the strong dominating kind of field energy, but are overlooking the needs of the other person. And so then these patterns are set into place, and sometimes if the timid person has a hard time expressing themselves, they might not feel like they have the capacity to have that conversation with that person, or every time they try to bring it up, the other person gets so passionate about it that it pushes them back into that field, and then they don't know how to communicate what they were trying to communicate, because in that field resonance, it's like almost like their mind gets wiped and they're swept off their feet and they can't really even express themselves. So it becomes a really difficult situation or difficult conversation for the more timid, the more empathic person to have with the more dominating energy. And then what happens is over time, these patterns set into place, and then the person that's more passive ends up getting resentful because their needs are not being met, but they don't have a way of really communicating that with the other person, because the other person kind of takes over the field every time the conversation is brought up. So it's important for both people to know which one is typically more of the active dominating energy and which one's typically more of the passive energy. Neither one of them is better than the other, but it's important to just understand who is who in the relationship and then have this conversation so that both people are given the space, the safe space to express themselves and also to set boundaries. So a really helpful thing for navigating this kind of situation is realizing that everything doesn't need to be one big discussion in person necessarily. So as you're working through different things, sometimes the appropriate thing to do is to say, okay, this is great. Now let's separate, come to our own ideas about things, and potentially even send notes back and forth, or letters or emails. This has been tremendously powerful in my relationships. Sometimes when I've felt like I've not been able to express myself, or with the person that I'm with feels like they can't express themselves, I'll say, hey, why don't you write me a note telling me how you feel about everything, and then I can fully get that transmission from you without having my emotions, my passionate emotions regarding the situation kind of take over the field. And this creates the opportunity for much clearer communication. Because again, I want to touch on something. When uncharted territory comes across the relationship path, very oftentimes the active person will take over the field in trying to organize things and end up creating an asymmetrical organization that are serving their needs but not serving the other person's needs, and then the other person gets stuck in that situation, and then over time it creates resentment that builds up and ends up causing issues in the relationship because there's not needs being met on both sides. So this is a really common thing that happens. So have this conversation. Open up the space and have the conversation about active energy versus passive energy, and you can play this video just so that precedence is set and there's an understanding there, right? Do your best to create a safe space to communicate about this. And then also take in practices in which maybe you take time apart to come into your own space so that you can become clear about things before you rush into decisions. And then also, if necessary, you can separate and you can write notes back and forth, or letters or emails, because that oftentimes is a great way for people to be able to speak from within their own field and express what's true for them when they're somebody that sometimes gets overwhelmed in a strong field of somebody else's. So thanks so much for tuning in. This is Patrick Hayes. Just to let you know, I am opening up for relationship mentorship. This is a new thing that I'm offering. So if you're interested in doing one-on-one or two-on-one work, where I work with you or you and your partner to help improve communication, improve intimacy, go deeper with your partner, then feel free to reach out to me. There's going to be a link underneath that points to my mentorship. So thanks so much for tuning in. If this video is useful, please share it with somebody else you feel that might be useful for. And I'm super stoked to talk to you next time. One love.